In the ancient hills of Canaan, where olive trees stood tall and the wind whispered secrets of centuries past, a prophet named Elias walked among the people. He was sent by God to guide the children of Israel, who had once been favored but had lost their way, straying into the wilderness of greed, power, and praise. This was not the first time Elias had come to speak truth to a people who refused to hear it. But now, the stakes were higher, for his words were meant for a future that would not yet understand their meaning. Elias, my chosen one, the voice of God had whispered one night under the stars, "You are to go to my people, to speak of justice, mercy, and peace. But know this, your words will be rejected by many, for their hearts have grown cold. Yet still you must speak, for the world is watching." Elias, with his heart burdened by the weight of prophecy, traveled from village to village, speaking of love, compassion, and the sacred bond between the children of Abraham. But it was not an easy journey. His message was not what the powerful wanted to hear. The children of Israel had once been wanderers, homeless and scattered, yearning for a land they could call their own. And in time they found it, a land rich with soil flowing with milk and honey. But this land was not empty. It had been home to the Canaanites and later to countless generations who tilled its fields and built homes from its stones. Over time, the children of Israel, blessed by God and strengthened by their victories, established themselves as rulers. But with this power came a darkness. Elias had seen it growing for years. The leaders, once humble, became corrupt, using the name of God to justify acts of cruelty and oppression against those who stood in next. "Have you forgotten the mercy of the Lord?" Elias would ask, his voice breaking through the crowded marketplaces where people hurried about their lives. "You were once strangers in this land, and now you turn your back on those who seek refuge and peace. Where is your compassion? Where is your justice?" But his words fell on deaf ears. The rulers of Israel grew more arrogant with each passing day, building walls around themselves, fortresses to protect their power. They spoke of security, of threats from outside. But Elias knew the real threat was within. One night, as Elias knelt in prayer, he had a vision. The land before him stretched out, but it was no longer the peaceful countryside he had known. Instead, towering walls divided cities, separating families from one another. Armed men patrolled streets once filled with the laughter of children. Elias saw the faces of the oppressed, those who cried out for mercy, their voices drowned by the roar of weapons and the iron grip of fear. "What is this, Lord?" Elias cried out, his heart heavy with sorrow. "Why must your people suffer like this? Why have they turned to violence and hatred?" But the voice of God was silent. In his vision, Elias saw a people who had forgotten their covenant with the Creator. They had grown blind to the suffering of others, obsessed with power and control over a land that was meant to be shared. And he saw another people, the descendants of those who had once lived peacefully in the land, now pushed to the margins, denied their dignity and freedom. They too cried out to God, asking for justice, for a place to call home. Elias knew then that his mission was not just to warn the people of his time, but to speak to those in the future who would witness these same tragedies unfold. He understood that the struggle he saw was not confined to his era. It was a struggle that would echo through generations. In the centuries to come. The land Elias once knew would become the site of fierce conflict. A new nation would rise, calling itself Israel, claiming the same ancient promises that had once been given to the children of Abraham. But the descendants of those who had lived in the land for generations, the Palestinians, would find themselves dispossessed, displaced, and voiceless. Elias watched from the heavens, his spirit burdened by the suffering of the people on both sides of the conflict. The same pattern of oppression he had witnessed in his own time was repeating itself, but now on a scale far greater than he could have ever imagined. The walls that had once existed only in his visions were now real. They divided cities like Jerusalem, once a symbol of unity and faith, now a battleground of division and fear. The cries of the children of Palestine echoed in the streets, their homes destroyed, their future uncertain. And yet, the world remained largely silent. Elias wept, not just for the Palestinians but for the Israelis too. He saw how fear had twisted their hearts, how the trauma of their past had blinded them to the suffering they now inflicted upon others. The cycle of violence, once started, seemed impossible to stop. One last time, God sent Elias back to the earth, not in flesh, but in spirit. He stood on a hill overlooking the land that had once been promised to his people. It was no longer the land of milk and honey. The olive trees were dying, the fields were barren, and the rivers ran with blood. Elias looked down upon the divided cities, the checkpoints, the refugee camps, and the settlements. He saw children throwing stones at tanks, and soldiers firing bullets in return. He saw homes reduced to rubble and families torn apart by grief. And then he spoke not to the leaders of Israel, nor to the rulers of Palestine, but to the ordinary people, the ones who suffered most in the midst of the conflict. "O children of Abraham," Elias's voice rang out across the land, carried by the wind to every corner of the earth. "Have you forgotten the covenant of your fathers? You were meant to be a light unto the nations, but now you walk in darkness. You were called to be peacemakers, yet you wage war. Is this the legacy you wish to leave your children?" His words, though soft, carried a power that shook the very foundations of the land. For a brief moment, the fighting stopped. Both sides looked to the heavens, wondering who had spoken such truth. "There is still time," Elias continued, his voice filled with both sorrow and hope. "Time to turn back, to heal the wounds that have been inflicted on this sacred land. Time to see one another not as enemies, but as brothers and sisters, for you are all children of the same God." But as quickly as the moment had come, it passed. The fighting resumed, the walls remained, and the cries of the oppressed once again filled the air. In the end, Elias's message was rejected, just as it had been in the ancient times. He watched as the cycle of violence continued, as more lives were lost, and as the land he had once walked upon became a symbol of division and hatred. But even in his death, Elias did not despair, for he knew that somewhere, someday, there would be those who would hear his words and act upon them. There would be those who would break the cycle, who would tear down the walls, and who would seek peace not through power, but through love. And so, Elias's spirit returned to the heavens, where he now watches, waiting for the day when the people of Israel and Palestine will finally listen to the voice of the prophet who had come to them so many years ago. Though the struggle continues, the message of Elias lives on. His words echo in the hearts of those who seek justice, mercy, and peace in a land torn apart by conflict. And perhaps one day the people of Israel and Palestine will remember the covenant of their ancestors, the promise of a land where all can live in harmony. Until then, Elias waits, his heart filled with hope for a future where peace will finally reign. When Elias returned to the earth once more, his heart was filled with great sorrow, yet there was a faint glimmer of hope. He had been sent to the children of Israel, but now he served as the voice of the people in Palestine. In the lands where it all began, he tried to be the voice of justice and mercy for both the Israelites and the Palestinians, but the people only saw enemies in each other's eyes. The world had taken a shape far beyond Elias's prophecies. Every day he witnessed the destruction of homes and the shattering of families. The holy city of Jerusalem was no longer just the city of those who prayed, but also of soldiers carrying weapons. Violence had deeply embedded itself in the hearts of the people, and fear covered everything. Only those who seek peace will find true serenity in these lands, Elias constantly reminded himself as he gazed at the mountains of Jerusalem, his eyes welling with tears. But who desires peace? Who is ready to fight for brotherhood? Elias's mission was nearing its end. The conflicts between the Israelites and Palestinians seemed to create the exact opposite of the message he had devoted his life to. Elias decided to address the people one last time. Perhaps he could still change something. He saw the fear in the faces of Palestinian children and the anxiety in the hearts of the people living in Israel. Both sides, once treading the same land where prophets walked, now viewed each other as enemies. "O children of Israel and the people of Palestine," Elias cried, lifting his hands to the sky. "Allah made you heirs to these lands, but you have forgotten the meaning of that inheritance. Neither you nor they are the true owners of this land. This land belongs to Allah. You will all die one day and be judged for your actions in this world. What are you fighting for? A piece of land or an illusion of victory?" These words echoed across both Israel and Palestinian territories. The people paused for a moment to reflect, but before Elias could see whether any change had occurred within them, he was confronted with a bitter truth about his own fate. Though Elias's message carried great hope, some were disturbed by his presence. Certain leaders and extremist groups within Israel realized that Elias's words threatened their power. He was critical of their violent policies and anti-peace stance. When Elias preached that peace was the only true solution, he became a significant threat to the war advocates. One night, while Elias was praying, his house was raided in silence. With his heart filled with faith in Allah, Elias sensed the danger approaching, yet he felt no fear. The attackers came to silence his message of peace. "O Allah, I could not complete the mission you gave me, But I know peace will one day come to this land, Elias prayed as he closed his eyes. These people will one day be brothers because your justice always prevails. That night, Elias's house was set ablaze, and he was killed. Yet his death did not silence his message. Elias's name became a legend. The message of peace, justice, and mercy that he spent his life spreading found a permanent place in the hearts of the people. Both the Israelites and Palestinians began to remember his teachings. Perhaps in time, the peace Elias prophesied would become a reality. Elias's death was tragic, but his message lived on. His voice echoed through the stone walls of Palestine, and his words resonated in the crowded streets of Israel. Now the people slowly began to realize the meaning of sharing a common past instead of seeing each other as enemies. Even in his death, Elias had planted the seeds of peace. Centuries later, Elias's name would still be remembered in these lands. Both the people of Israel and Palestine would recall his teachings again and again, coming together for peace. Because what Elias had said was timeless. This land was not given to you, it was entrusted to you. Protect it and share it. Only those who live in peace are the true heirs of this land. Elias's soul found peace in the heavens as he awaited the day when both peoples would come together as brothers. He may not have been able to bring peace to his people once more, but his message continued to live on, echoing in every righteous heart.